standing on a job site in Stuttgart, Germany. My ex-wife had just gotten married, 3 months after our divorce, and my sister had accidentally been invited to the ceremony. What she said during the toasts made the bride leave her own reception. I'm an HVAC tech. Have been since I got out of the army at 24. I fix heating and cooling systems in houses, offices, restaurants. Anywhere air moves through ducts, that's my world. I'm good at it. Not rich, not famous, just steady. Megan and I got married when I was 29. She was an event coordinator, weddings, corporate dinners, fundraisers. She loved the energy of it. I loved that she loved something. We bought a small house outside Columbus. 2 cars, a dog named Biscuit, weeknight dinners on the couch. Normal life. The problem started when she began working with a photographer named Derek. He shot every event she coordinated. She talked about him constantly, his eye for angles, his way with clients, how he understood her vision. I didn't think much of it. People talk about coworkers. That's just life. Then the late night started. Weekends away for destination events. A phone that was always face down on the counter. I asked her once if something was going on. She rolled her eyes and said I was being insecure. She said Derek was a colleague and I needed to grow up. So I dropped it. That was my first mistake. On a Tuesday in March, my dispatcher sent me on an emergency call. The regular tech was out sick, and a client on Miller Road needed their heat pump looked at before a cold snap. I loaded my van and drove 40 minutes out to a lake house in the country. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, I saw Megan's white Civic parked behind a black SUV. My wife was supposed to be at a conference in Pittsburgh. That's what she told me Sunday night when she packed her bag and kissed me on the cheek. I didn't knock on the front door. I walked around the side of the house to check the outdoor unit. That's where the heat pump sits. The back porch had floor-to-ceiling glass. Through it, I saw Megan sitting on the couch with Derek. His arm was around her. Her head was on his shoulder. 2 wine glasses on the coffee table, a suitcase open on the floor. I took a photo with my phone. Then I walked back to my van, called dispatch, and told them I had a scheduling conflict with this address. I asked them to send someone else. I drove home. My hands were steady the whole way. I didn't speed. I didn't pull over. I just drove. Megan came back Wednesday night. She walked in the door with her conference lanyard still around her neck. A nice touch. I'll give her that. She kissed my forehead and said the speakers were boring, but the hotel was great. I looked at the lanyard. It was from a marketing summit in Pittsburgh. A real event. She'd probably registered online just to get the badge. I could have shown her the photo right then. I could have asked her why her car was parked at a lake house on Miller Road while she was supposedly listening to keynote speakers 3 hours east. But I didn't. Instead, I called my buddy Tanner. He and I served together at Fort Bragg, and 2 years ago he'd moved to Stuttgart, Germany, to work HVAC on the army housing at Kelly Barracks. Every few months, he'd text me job listings. Military installations overseas always need licensed American techs. The pay was solid. I'd always said no. That Wednesday night, while Megan was in the shower washing off her conference, I texted Tanner. "That job's still open?" He replied in 4 minutes. "For you? Always." I didn't sleep that night. But I wasn't lying in the dark feeling sorry for myself. I was on my laptop filling out the application for the Department of Defense contractor position in Stuttgart. Thursday morning, I drove straight to a family lawyer on East Broad Street. 30 minutes in his office. I showed him the photo, asked how fast we could move. He said Ohio is no fault. The photo wouldn't change the settlement, but it'd speed things up if she didn't contest. I drove home, waited for Megan to leave for work, and packed 3 boxes, clothes, tools, documents. Everything else could stay. I put the boxes in the garage under a tarp. That evening, Megan cooked dinner. Pasta with that garlic bread I liked. She was in a good mood, talking about a wedding she was planning for June, how Derek had already scouted the lighting angles at the venue. She said his name and smiled at the pasta like it was the most natural thing in the world. I waited until she was done. Then I said, "How was the lake house on Miller Road?" She stopped stirring. The wooden spoon just hung in her hand over the pot. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain how I knew. I just looked at her and let the silence fill the kitchen like gas from an open burner. She put the spoon down. Her hand was shaking. She said, "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer. She knew exactly what I was talking about. and the longer I stayed quiet, the more her face confirmed it. Megan stood there for about 10 seconds, gripping the edge of the counter. Then she did something I didn't expect. She got angry. Not guilty. Angry. She said I had no right to follow her. She said I was being paranoid. She asked me how I even knew about that house. I told her I was doing my job. A dispatch call. Random coincidence. The universe just decided to send me to that exact address on that exact day. She didn't have an answer for that. She tried. She opened her mouth twice, and both times nothing came out. So she switched tactics. She said it was just one time. She said it didn't mean anything. She said Derek understood her in ways I never tried to. I let her finish. Every word she said made it easier. Then I told her the lawyer had already started on the paperwork. I told her I was leaving the house, and I wasn't coming back. I told her she could keep Biscuit because I was moving to another country. She laughed. She actually laughed and said, "You're not moving anywhere. You wouldn't last a week without me." I picked up my phone, walked to the garage, loaded the 3 boxes into my van, and backed out of the driveway while she stood in the kitchen doorway, still holding that wooden spoon. That was the last time I saw her face to face. The next 5 weeks were paperwork and waiting. My lawyer handled the divorce filing. Tanner pushed my application through the contractor pipeline at Kelly Barracks, background check, security clearance, the whole DOD process. I crashed at my sister Jess's place in Columbus while everything moved through the system. Took freelance HVAC jobs to stay busy. Checked my email every evening for clearance approval. It came through on a Thursday. I booked a one-way flight for Sunday. Megan didn't contest the divorce. She signed everything my lawyer sent her without a fight. The house, the savings, all of it. I think she wanted me gone fast so she could start fresh without guilt dragging behind her. The house sold a month later. We split it down the middle. I wired my half to a German bank account Tanner helped me set up. By late May, I had a badge, a work schedule, and a small apartment 20 minutes from the base. Same work, different continent. The guys on the crew were mostly vets like me. We ate lunch together, complained about German weather, and didn't talk about our exes. My sister called me once a week. During one of those calls, she mentioned Megan had already moved in with Derek. I told Jess I didn't want updates. She said okay. Then 6 weeks later, Jess called again and said, "You're not going to believe this. Megan and Derek were getting married. 3 months after our divorce was final." My sister had heard it through the catering network. She knew people at every event venue in Central Ohio. The wedding was booked at a restored barn outside Delaware, the kind of place with string lights and exposed beams that costs more than my van. But here's the part that made my jaw drop. Derek had hired a catering company for the wedding, and Jess's company was the subcontractor handling desserts. Her boss had taken the job without checking the guest list. By the time Jess realized whose wedding it was, the contract was already signed and the deposit was paid. Jess called me and asked what she should do. I told her to do her job. Go, set up the dessert table, and come home. Don't make a scene. Don't say anything to Megan. She agreed. The wedding was on a Saturday in July. I was in Stuttgart, finishing a 12-hour shift replacing ductwork in a barracks building. My phone was in my locker. When I finally checked it at 8 in the evening, which was 2 in the afternoon in Ohio, I had 11 missed calls from Jess and a text that said, "Call me now." I walked outside into the warm German evening and called her. Jess told me the story in one long, breathless run. She'd set up the dessert table in the barn. Nobody recognized her. Megan had only met Jess twice during our marriage, and both times were brief. Derek had never met her at all. Jess kept her head down, arranged the cake, and planned to leave after the first course. But the barn was small. One exit, and the speeches started while she was still packing up her trays in the back. Derek's best man gave a toast. Then Megan's sister. Then Derek stood up and thanked everyone for coming and said something about how fate brought him and Megan together at exactly the right time. That's when a woman sitting alone at one of the back tables turned to Jess and said, "The right time?" He was still with me when he started with her. Jess looked at the woman. She wasn't drunk. She wasn't loud. She introduced herself as Rachel, the bride from the Hartfield wedding last fall. Derek had been her photographer. He'd pursued her during the planning, almost broke up her engagement, then dropped her once the event was over and moved on to the next client. Rachel said she'd found out about today's wedding through a mutual vendor and came as a guest +1 just to see if it was true. Jess said she felt her hands go cold. The host asked if anyone else wanted to say a few words. The room went quiet, and Jess stood up. My sister is 5'2" and afraid of public speaking. She once cried at a school presentation in 5th grade. She told me that when she stood up in that barn, her legs were shaking so hard she thought the chair behind her was rattling. But she opened her mouth and said one sentence. She looked straight at Megan and said, "My brother gave you 7 years, and you replaced him in 3 months with the same guy who was doing this at the Hartfield wedding last fall." The barn went dead silent. Megan recognized Jess in that moment. I know because Jess said Megan's face went from confused to white in about 2 seconds. Derek grabbed Megan's arm and whispered something. The best man stood up like he was going to say something. Jess didn't wait. She picked up her tray, walked out the back, loaded her van, and drove home. She called me from her apartment 45 minutes later, hands still shaking, and told me every detail. I didn't say much. I just listened. When she finished, I said, "You didn't have to do that." She said, "Yeah, I did." I stood there under a street lamp on a sidewalk in Stuttgart, and for the first time in months, I felt something loosen in my chest. 2 weeks after the wedding, Tanner showed me a Facebook post someone had forwarded through 3 people. Rachel, the woman from the Hartfield wedding, had written a long public post naming Derek by full name. She said he pursued her during her own wedding planning, that she'd nearly left her fiancé over it, and that she'd kept quiet for a year out of shame. She said standing in that barn and watching him do it again made her realize silence was just permission for him to keep going. The post had over 400 shares. Within a month, Derek's photography business was finished. His website went dark. His Instagram disappeared. 3 venues in Central Ohio quietly removed him from their vendor lists. Megan called my sister. Not me, Jess. She asked Jess why she'd done it. Jess said, "Because someone had to." Megan hung up. 2 months after her wedding to Derek, Megan moved out of the apartment they shared. Jess heard through the catering network that Derek had financed the wedding, the honeymoon, and half his equipment on credit cards. He owed over $60,000, and Megan's name was on some of it. She'd traded a paid-off house and a steady husband for a guy who couldn't even pay for his own camera lenses. In October, my boss at Kelly Barracks called me into his office. He had a 2-year contract extension on his desk, permanent staff, better pay, housing allowance included. He said I was the best tech on the crew and he wanted me locked in. I signed it before he finished the sentence. That evening, I walked to a small bar near my apartment where the crew goes on Fridays. Tanner was already there, 2 beers in. I told him about the contract. He raised his glass and said, "Welcome home." Before I could take a sip, my phone buzzed. A photo from Jess, Megan walking out of the Franklin County Courthouse